Hello, you're watching the Ruslan Belov channel. Today we'll discuss the global situation as of June 14th, 2025. A large number of events have taken place, so let's get started. And today's developments are noteworthy not only in the zone of the special military operation, but also, of course, in the context of the Iran-Israel conflict. Let's begin with Ukraine and several very interesting statements made by Ukrainian officials. For example, yesterday, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine announced that Ukraine is not interested in continuing the negotiation process. It's worth noting that such statements began to appear immediately after the Russian side returned, or rather announced the return of, a large number of bodies, at least 6,000, which Russia is prepared to hand over to Ukraine. Immediately after the second batch, that is, after just over 2,400 bodies had been returned, the Ukrainian side declared its disinterest. It's difficult to determine the main reasons for this lack of interest. The Ukrainian side claims that the Russian Federation is not offering any proposals for a peaceful settlement or ceasefire. Therefore, we can likely expect an official statement from Ukrainian President Zelensky in the near future. At the same time, the Russian side continues its offensive along the entire line of contact. Last night, another series of strikes was carried out on the pocket between the Chernihiv and Sumy regions in northeastern Ukraine. Drones were used once again, seemingly targeting communications infrastructure. Let me remind you that since the beginning of June, the Russian side has been heavily focused on this section of the front. Every 2 to 3 days, new footage from objective control is published, showing yet another Ukrainian position equipped with various devices either to counter Russian drones or to support Ukrainian UAVs striking deep into Russian territory. These sites are consistently targeted by Geran drone strikes, as well as combined strikes involving Gerans and Iskander missiles. Also keep in mind that this pocket, located in the northeastern part of Chernihiv and the northern part of Sumy, is where the main positions of the Ukrainian armed forces for launching attacks deep into Russian territory are situated. This pocket is critically important for the Russian Federation. Without establishing a security zone in this section of the front, it's essentially pointless to talk about any kind of meaningful security buffer for Russia, especially in terms of minimizing strikes on its interior. Now, let's move on to the line of contact. We'll begin with the Sumy direction, where over the past 24 hours, Russian units have significantly improved their positions. Yesterday, the Russian Ministry of Defense announced the complete clearing of the village of Yablonovka. Based on that report, we marked Yablonovka and the adjacent forest area as fully under Russian control on the map. A few hours later, after we had already published our previous video report, footage surfaced showing Russian soldiers raising a flag over a partially destroyed building in the village. It's hard to say whether the flag was placed by a drone or whether the area around the site was unsafe, as no Russian soldiers were visible in the footage. Nevertheless, the settlement has been marked accordingly. Moreover, both pro-Russian and neutral cartographers have made additional updates. Today, for the first time, the village of Vorochina was marked by certain experts as being under Russian armed forces control. Possibly, later today, the Russian Ministry of Defense will confirm control over this settlement. Overall, if the reports from this section of the front are confirmed, we can confidently say that the Russian troop group, advancing in the central sector toward the city of Sumy, has reached the second line of Ukrainian defense. This includes the villages of Kotin, Pisarivka, Volzhanska, Okeanitsia, Novosech, and so on. I'll remind you that on the western flank, Russian units have already reached this line some time ago, but no further advances have been made so far. It seems that everyone is waiting for the battle for the village of Yablonovka to be resolved. This settlement remains firmly under Ukrainian control for now. However, some pro-Russian cartographers have already marked the northern part of Yablonovka as under Russian control, extending nearly to the central part of the village. Some pro-Russian experts claim that as of June 14th, the Russian Federation controls at least 45% of Yablonovka and is continuing its offensive. Apparently, only after Yablonovka is cleared will the Russian side potentially move forward toward the next defensive line. Now let's move on to the Kupiansk front. There is also a lot of interesting news here. Generally speaking, over the past 2 months, discussions regarding the Kupiansk direction have focused on the area north of Kupiansk along the Oskil River. near settlements such as Kondrashivka, Zakidna, Doroshivka, Dvorichna, Krasna Persha, Petrevka, and Kamenka. Here, the Russian army has been actively advancing, and currently, the entire stretch of the Oskil River, from Kupiansk to the state border, is under Russian control, with offensives continuing. But today, or in recent days, the Russian army launched a new unexpected offensive, this time along the very eastern edge of the entire Kupiansk pocket. Since June 2025, the Russian Federation has been actively targeting crossings along the Oskil River between Kupiansk, Vuzlovyi, and southward towards Sinkiv. In these images, we can observe the destruction of another bridge or crossing that Ukrainian forces were using to support their units on the eastern bank of the Oskil River. Around the same time, footage was published from the Kupiansk-Vuzlovyi area showing a strike on yet another crossing, this time using a Kh-38 missile. Naturally, after such destruction or disruption of logistics, a renewed offensive was to be expected. There were questions about how exactly the Russian army would proceed, as there were many options, including an advance from Kruhlakivka northward toward Kolesnikivka, Hlushkivka, and possibly further toward Kovsharivka. However, the Russian army decided to advance from the east, aiming primarily to shorten the artillery distance to the Kupiansk agglomeration. According to certain cartographers, over the past 24 hours, Russian forces managed to fully take control of Stepova Novoselivka, as well as the tree lines and fields surrounding the area. I'll remind you that it's extremely difficult for Russian units to advance further into the Kharkiv region on the Ukrainian side of the Oskil River unless they manage to bring their artillery significantly closer. To effectively advance, especially to envelop the entire Kupiansk agglomeration, Russian forces must at least reach this red line. That means the fighting for Pischane and Petropavlivka must be completed. Only from these forward positions will Russian forces be able to shorten the artillery range to key logistical routes located to the west of the Kupiansk agglomeration and the Oskil River. Therefore, it appears that the Russian army will now advance toward this salient, aiming to cut it off and reduce the distance needed for artillery to strike Ukrainian positions in the vicinity of settlements like Starovorovka and Grushkovka. Let me also remind you that this is the very area where the Ukrainian side recently announced a partial and forced evacuation, and apparently to enable strikes on these positions, it also makes sense to shrink the pocket in order to bring artillery within range. Next, we move further south toward the settlement of Konstantinovka, where the Russian army continues its offensive, mainly from the southern flank of the southeastern sector. Today, the main developments took place around northern and southern Delavka. If you look at the map, you'll notice that over the past 24 hours, Russian units have significantly improved their positions. In particular, the Russian army has taken full control of a company-level stronghold located in the area of southern Delavka and the railway station. Several other positions have been captured to the north. According to some cartographers, Russian forces managed to clear another tree line along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. Overall, we are seeing the battle here entering its final phase, where the Russian army is trying to completely align the front line along the Nelipovka northern Delivka axis and then further northeast toward the canal. This is currently the Russian army's top priority. There are also reports that Russian troops have captured a strategic height along the T-0516 highway. From these positions, they now have a view over what is effectively the only remaining supply route for Ukrainian units stationed along the Krivoy Toretsk River and the railway between Novgorodskoye and Konstantinovka. These positions now allow Russia to fully control this quadrant. Apparently, additional FPV drone units will soon be deployed here to establish full control over the area. At the same time, Russian forces are steadily closing the distance and cutting off the Ukrainian grouping's supply lines from the western flank, pushing toward Highway 05-24. Over the past 24 hours, we've also seen updates to the map in this sector. This was the situation as recently as yesterday. The fields and most of the N20 road were still under Ukrainian control. Today, there are reports that Russian forces have broken through to the north. At present, the estimated distance between the Russian army's forward positions and Highway 05-24 is already around 1.6 kilometers. That's effectively within range for fire control, FPV drone strikes, and potentially even sabotage and reconnaissance teams. It's only a matter of time before Russian vanguard forces appear directly on the road near the tree lines. Once we start receiving verified footage confirming this, we will be able to speak with confidence about the formation of a pocket, or even a full operational encirclement, of Ukrainian troops currently trapped in this salient. These include the settlements of Klebanbeg, Katerinovka, Novospaskaya, and Shcherbinovka. There is a significant Ukrainian force here, and while it's too early to estimate exact numbers, it may well be around 1,000 soldiers, give or take. If the situation continues to develop in this manner, we should also expect either a retreat by Ukrainian units or a possible counterattack from the direction of Konstantinovka toward both western Kleshchi and the eastern sector, with the aim of breaking the encirclement and stabilizing the front. This area is certain to become very hot in the near future. As for the western part of Yablonovka, or the village as a whole, the Russian advance has either stalled or we're simply not receiving any updates. The last confirmed progress here, on the western edge of Yablonovka, was recorded about a week ago, around Monday. Since then, there's been no new information. At that time, we assumed that Russian forces were on the verge of entering the central part of Yablonovka, and that fighting for this sector would soon begin. But for the entire week, there has been complete silence. It's hard to say why. Perhaps the Russian army has decided to pause the offensive until the front line to the south of the village is fully aligned, roughly along the anti-tank trench dug south of Yablonovka and southwest of Alexander Kalinov. Perhaps once they reach that red line, a more active phase of the offensive will resume. But based on the latest map corrections from various sources, several days of fighting likely still remain before that red line is reached. Next, we move to the South Donetsk direction, from where a large volume of reports is coming in. The Russian army is advancing rapidly toward Novopavlovka. Today, footage emerged from the settlement of Gorokov. Yesterday, the Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed full control of this village, although it hadn't been supported by objective control footage at the time. But several hours later, in the evening news, combat footage from this area was published, showing geolocations confirming Russian presence, at least on Yuzhnaya Street. So combining the available geolocation evidence with the Defense Ministry's report, we can safely say that the village is most likely under full Russian control. Moreover, Russian forces continue to gradually expand their zone of control, pushing outward from Gorokov toward the tree lines and fields between the Volchya River and the village, effectively tightening the noose around Ukrainian troops still inside this pocket. As we previously discussed, the pace of Ukrainian evacuation is likely to increase soon. Additionally, there are reports today of the village of Zeleny Kot being cleared. This small village along the Volchya River, west of Alexevka, has reportedly come under Russian control. The next settlement in line is Novaya Ukrainka. After that, Ukrainian troops will be left with only a few strongholds further north and some tree lines. But again, it seems very likely that this entire pocket will be abandoned soon. At the same time, the Russian offensive is gaining momentum near the settlement of Komar. Just yesterday, the Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed a full sweep of the area. Footage was also released, briefly showing the course of the fighting in this direction. We could see the artillery preparation, the clearing operations, FPV drone strikes, and possibly some footage of Ukrainian troops being taken prisoner. In the final frames of the video, Russian soldiers can be seen raising their flags in various parts of Komar. Based on that report from the Russian Ministry of Defense, we already made major map updates in this direction yesterday. Today, further reports indicate that the front in this area has collapsed, and the Russian army is advancing almost unhindered toward the northwest, toward settlements like Zaporizhzhia, Zorka, and Yalta. These are essentially the last Ukrainian-held villages in this sector, located between two rivers, between the Mokrye Yali River, which we'll mark on the map now, and the Volchya River. This is where the last Ukrainian positions in this direction are concentrated. The Russian army is rapidly advancing. There are clearly logistical issues for the Ukrainian garrison here, and these supply problems seem to be the decisive factor behind the lack of stiff Ukrainian resistance. It's likely that this sector will fall quickly. There are also new reports of intensified fighting around Shevchenko. Hostilities have begun for control of the village, and the area around it is now a full-fledged foothold west of the Mokriye Yali River. Russia is likely building up momentum here as well. Given the fall of Komar, we should not expect significant Ukrainian resistance all the way up to Velikaya Mikhailovka and perhaps a few villages to the east. From the Zaporizhzhia direction, new objective control footage has emerged. We had been discussing for several days now the entry of Russian troops into the settlement of Malinovka. And today, the first visual confirmations appeared. According to the author of this footage, we can see Ukrainian drones flying over Malinovka and recording the forward positions of Russian troops. However, the video shows neither Russian soldiers nor a Russian flag. So based solely on the author's commentary, most cartographers, and we as well, have updated the maps accordingly. That's all for now, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and take care.